Number 1. The Absinthe Pudding Scandal. There was a time when dessert wasn't just sweet, it was intoxicating. In late 19th century America, the most fashionable households served a shimmering green custard known as absinthe pudding. It arrived at the table in ornate glass dishes, glowing like emerald silk beneath the candlelight. Guests whispered about its flavor, anise, fennel, and something elusive, almost dangerous. That secret came from absinthe, a spirit so potent it would soon be outlawed across the country. Absinthe wasn't just a drink, it was a cultural obsession. Imported from France, it was the muse of poets, painters, and bohemians. The green liquor became a symbol of rebellion and sophistication, and American high society took notice. Cooks began experimenting, folding it into creams, syrups, and puddings. A teaspoon could perfume an entire dish. The result was a dessert that tasted like elegance itself, cool, herbal, and hypnotic. But as absinthe's popularity grew, so did its dark reputation. Newspapers warned that it caused hallucinations, madness, even murder. Moral reformers claimed it was destroying the very soul of Europe. When the US government banned absinthe in 1912, the ruling didn't just target the drink, it silenced every recipe that carried its name. Absinthe puddings, candies, and custards were quietly erased from cookbooks. To serve them became an act of defiance. For those who remembered it, the dessert symbolized something more than flavor. It was a taste of a vanished world. Housewives who once ladled it into crystal bowls turned to plain gelatin and vanilla cream instead. The green fairy, as absinthe was nicknamed, faded into rumor and nostalgia. Generations later, when the ban finally lifted in 2007, the pudding never returned. Its moment had passed, replaced by safer, tamer sweets. What made it so haunting wasn't just its forbidden ingredient. It was the way it captured an era that flirted with danger and indulgence at the same time. Absinthe pudding wasn't meant for the practical or the cautious. It belonged to a time when America was learning to balance refinement with restraint, temptation with morality. And when the curtain fell on that experiment, it closed on one of the most mysterious desserts ever to grace the American table. Next time you see a soft green liqueur glinting under a bar light, imagine it in a bowl of pudding chilled on a marble countertop in 1895. Imagine the laughter, the lace, the crystal spoons tapping faintly against glass. That's where the story of dessert met the story of decadence, and both were never quite the same again. 2. The real custard that could kill. Before refrigeration, custard was more than a comfort food. It was a gamble. In the late 1800s, no dessert was more beloved at church suppers, train dining cars, or family picnics than a creamy yellow bowl of boiled custard. It was a taste of home and elegance all in one. But behind its gentle sweetness hid a danger that few understood until it was too late. Custard was simple in theory: milk, eggs, sugar, and a touch of nutmeg. The trouble was how people kept it. Without ice boxes or reliable cooling, the eggs were often stored at room temperature, and milk came straight from the cow, unpasteurized, unfiltered, and full of life in all the wrong ways. Once whipped together and gently heated, the mixture became a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. Yet homemakers proudly ladled it into delicate china cups, sometimes leaving it out for hours before serving. The earliest cookbooks, like the White House Cookbook of 1887, described custard as a nourishing restorative for the sick or elderly. That kindness sometimes turned cruel. Entire families would fall ill after holiday dinners, struck by what doctors then called summer complaint. Today, we know it as salmonella poisoning. Back then, it was simply one of the risks of good living. Still, people adored it. Boiled custard symbolized gentility. It appeared at baptisms, Christmas gatherings, and funerals. Its scent, warm vanilla, nutmeg, and cream, carried through wooden houses like a promise. Housewives took pride in achieving the perfect texture, thick enough to coat a spoon, but smooth as silk. In many southern towns, the family who made the best custard was almost as respected as the one who built the church. The fall of boiled custard came not through scandal, but through science. By the early 1900s, pasteurization laws began spreading across the country, and food inspectors targeted recipes that used raw milk or undercooked eggs. Public health campaigns warned that what you can't see can still kill. Recipes were quietly rewritten. Boiled custard became baked custard, cooked longer, firmer, safer, and according to old-timers, far less delicious. To those who grew up with the old version, something was lost. It wasn't just the flavor, it was the ritual. The slow stirring over the fire, the test of patience and instinct, the moment the custard trembled but didn't break. Those were the marks of a cook's soul, not just her skill. Today, we chase that memory with packaged puddings and instant mixes, but the original lives on only in yellowed pages and faded memories. The custard that once united families also reminded them how fragile life was when nature and nourishment danced too close together. 3. The forgotten rum jelly of the 1800s. There was a time when dessert came with a buzz. In parlors lit by oil lamps and polished silver spoons, rum jelly was the shimmering crown jewel of the Victorian dinner table. It wasn't just a dessert, it was a celebration in gelatin form, a wobbling symbol of luxury and rebellion. In the early 1800s, American households were obsessed with molded desserts. Cookbooks like The Virginia Housewife and Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management taught readers how to suspend fruits, flowers, and flavors inside translucent shapes. The secret ingredient that gave these jellies their glow was isinglass, a gelatin made from fish bladders. But the true magic came from what they added next: rum. Not a drop or two, but enough to make each serving taste like a tropical vacation smuggled into a polite supper. Rum jelly carried a whiff of danger and adventure. The spirit itself was a relic of America's maritime past, brought home in barrels from the Caribbean by sailors who traded molasses and sugar. When wealthy Americans set their tables with rum-soaked jelly, they weren't just enjoying dessert, they were showing off the spoils of global trade. Every bite hinted at faraway places, warm seas, and a touch of mischief. But not everyone approved. By the mid-19th century, the temperance movement was sweeping the nation. Churches preached that alcohol was the devil's syrup, and reformers targeted not just taverns, but kitchens. Women's magazines began replacing rum with lemon flavoring or spirit essence. Recipes were sanitized, quite literally. The once dazzling rum jelly was recast as harmless fruit gelatin. Then came Prohibition, and with it the final nail in its crystal coffin. Alcoholic desserts vanished from public menus. Cooks hid their family recipes or quietly replaced rum with extract, pretending the flavor was close enough. It never was. Without the real thing, the dessert lost its character. The warmth that made the jelly quiver just a bit more dramatically on the plate. What makes rum jelly unforgettable today isn't just its forbidden ingredient. It's the world it represented, one where indulgence and restraint fought for control of the American table. When the jelly disappeared, so did that tension. Desserts became safe, predictable, childlike. The grown-up mystery was gone. Imagine it now. The glow of amber jelly trembling in the gaslight, the scent of rum mingling with sugar and spice, and a hush of delight as spoons cut into its soft, boozy heart. It was more than a dessert. It was a toast to a time when America still flirted with sin, one shimmering spoonful at a time. 4. The Fireball Baked Alaska. There was a time when dessert was an event, when waiters dimmed the lights, diners gasped, and fire danced across the table. That was the magic of Baked Alaska, the 20th century's most theatrical treat. But before it became the harmless ice cream cake we know today, it was served with real fire, an edible explosion that lit up America's finest dining rooms and occasionally set them ablaze. The original recipe was already impressive. Layers of sponge cake and ice cream sealed under a fluffy dome of meringue. The contrast was irresistible. Frozen inside, scorched outside. By the early 1900s, restaurants from New York to San Francisco competed to present the most spectacular version. Their secret? A generous pour of rum or brandy set alight just before serving. The dessert arrived at the table engulfed in blue flames, a blazing crown of sugar and alcohol. Patrons clapped, couples toasted. It was culinary theater at its most dazzling. But what began as spectacle soon earned a darker reputation. The fireball baked Alaska became notorious for mishaps. Dining rooms filled with gas lamps and heavy draperies weren't designed for open flames. Waiters singed their sleeves, tablecloths caught fire, and more than one establishment earned a front-page headline for a dinner gone wrong. The dessert's danger was part of its allure, until it wasn't. As safety standards tightened in the 1940s and insurance companies began cracking down on open flame service, flambéed desserts quietly disappeared. The post-war restaurant scene favored clean efficiency over drama. Baked Alaska survived, but its fire didn't. Modern kitchens replaced spectacle with refrigeration, and the last tableside flames went out for good. Still, there was something irresistible about that moment when heat met cold, when the line between science and art blurred in a flash of firelight. Those who witnessed it never forgot. To them, the Fireball Baked Alaska wasn't just dessert. It was a metaphor for the age itself. Daring, excessive, and doomed to burnout. Today, most people know Baked Alaska as a harmless nostalgia dish, a sweet relic of supper clubs and anniversaries. But its flaming predecessor belongs to a different era, one that prized wonder over safety, drama over reason. The dessert was dangerous, yes, but also unforgettable. Picture it, a grand dining hall, violins playing softly, the lights dimmed. A waiter steps forward, torch in hand. The flames rise, guests gasp, and for a fleeting moment the room glows with blue fire. It's beauty, brilliance, and chaos all at once. The final curtain call for the most dangerous dessert America ever applauded. 5. The raw milk ice cream craze. Long before stainless steel machines and supermarket cartons, ice cream was a labor of love. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, families churned it by hand in wooden barrels packed with ice and salt. The most prized versions were made from raw milk, rich, thick, and straight from the farm. It was pure, it was fresh, and it was dangerous. At the time, raw milk wasn't just common. It was celebrated. City milkmen delivered it daily in glass bottles sealed with paper caps. Rural families skimmed it straight from the pail. When turned into ice cream, it gave a depth of flavor that pasteurized milk never matched. Dense, velvety, almost buttery. A summer gathering without it felt incomplete. Children waited for the rhythmic sound of the crank turning. Adults poured fresh cream and sugar into the tin canister, and neighbors took turns churning until the mixture froze into magic. But as cities grew, milk lost its innocence. Industrial dairies sprang up, and cows were packed into unsanitary conditions. Tuberculosis, typhoid, and other bacteria spread silently through unpasteurized milk. Ice cream, especially homemade, became one of the easiest ways for those pathogens to reach the table. By the early 1900s, health boards began tracking mysterious outbreaks traced back to ice cream socials, fairs, and church picnics. What was once the taste of joy became a hidden killer. The turning point came when scientists like Louis Pasteur and later U.S. health advocates pushed for mandatory pasteurization. To many, it felt like an attack on tradition. Families protested that pasteurized milk was flat and lifeless. In small towns, old-timers whispered that the government was taking the cream right out of summer. Yet slowly, raw milk vanished from recipes. Cookbooks that once began with "take 1 quart of fresh cream from the morning milking" now read, "use pasteurized milk." The flavor dulled, but the danger faded. There's something haunting about those early ice cream gatherings, neighbors sharing a single wooden churn, kids licking the dasher, parents proudly serving a dessert that carried both love and risk. It was an age when food came straight from the land, with all its imperfections intact. Safety came later, but at a cost. Today, in some small American farms, raw milk ice cream is whispered about again, a forbidden delicacy for those who crave authenticity over assurance. But for most, it's just a story from the past, a reminder of how fragile pleasure once was and how even the sweetest things can carry shadows. Number 6, the burnt sugar pie of the Dust Bowl. In the 1930s, when dust storms swallowed the plains and families stretched every crumb to survive, dessert was both a memory and a miracle. Out of that struggle came one of America's most haunting sweets, the burnt sugar pie. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't even safe, but it was born from desperation, hope, and the need to taste something sweet when everything else had turned to grit. Flour was scarce, butter rarer still, and sugar was a luxury. Housewives learned to make do with what little they had: evaporated milk, lard, and canned goods. The pie's name came from its key ingredient, scorched sugar syrup. Women melted sugar over open flames or on gas stoves, cooking it until it turned the color of coffee, then mixing it with milk and flour to create a thick caramel custard. The smell, bitter, smoky, and sweet, filled the kitchen, a small comfort against the emptiness outside. But danger lurked in those recipes. Many women cooked on makeshift stoves fueled by kerosene or even gasoline, whatever they could find. A moment of distraction could turn a pie into a fireball. Rural newspapers of the time recorded dozens of kitchen flare-ups caused by boiling sugar left too long. Still, families risked it because burnt sugar pie tasted like something worth remembering. It was more than food. It was defiance. The pie said, "We may have lost our land, but we haven't lost our taste for sweetness." It reminded people of Sunday dinners before the drought, of mothers who measured by instinct, not recipe cards. Even its flavor carried a strange poetry, slightly bitter at first, then soft, smoky, and deeply comforting. Like the era itself, it forced you to find beauty in what was broken. As the Depression eased and prosperity returned, the burnt sugar pie disappeared from cookbooks. By the 1950s, it was considered poor man's food, replaced by the bright, airy confections of post-war America. But the old-timers remembered the smell of caramelized sugar on a hot afternoon, the way the pie cracked on top as it cooled, and how, for a few stolen minutes, the world felt normal again. Today, a few Midwestern families still keep the recipe tucked in handwritten notebooks, passed down from mothers who survived the Dust Bowl. It's a relic of resilience, a reminder that even hardship has flavor and that sweetness once earned is never truly forgotten. Number 7, the arsenic green cake. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, a shimmering green sponge with white frosting, decorated with candied violets and pistachios. In the parlors of the late Victorian era, this dessert was the height of fashion. The arsenic green cake dazzled guests with its color, a shade so bright and unnatural it seemed to glow. The secret behind its beauty, though, was deadly. The pigment that gave it life was laced with arsenic. In the 1800s, green was the color of luxury. From wallpapers to ball gowns, Shields green and Paris green dyes were everywhere. Made from copper arsenite, the pigment was cheap, vivid, and toxic. Bakers, ever eager to impress, began using traces of the same coloring in icings, candies, and even cake batters. Food dyes weren't regulated, and many came straight from textile factories. Housewives would buy powdered colors in small paper packets from apothecaries, trusting the labels that promised safe for use. The result was a dessert that could literally make you sick. Guests at grand dinners often complained of stomach cramps, nausea, or faintness afterward. Doctors chalked it up to rich food. No one suspected the frosting. In 1860, a scandal broke in England when several children died after eating bright green sweets. Word spread across the Atlantic, and by the 1870s, American newspapers warned that fashionable cakes may conceal a fatal ingredient. Still, the cakes kept appearing, especially in cities like New York, where pastry shops competed to make the most beautiful displays. Green symbolized freshness, spring, and refinement. To remove it was to lose a touch of modernity. It wasn't until the early 20th century that food safety laws began banning arsenic-based dyes, forcing confectioners to abandon their dangerous palettes. For the women who baked them, the arsenic green cake became a symbol of misplaced trust. They had followed the trends, bought the powders, and copied recipes from glossy magazines, never realizing the danger. The tragedy lay not just in the poisoning, but in the innocence of the act itself. A mother decorating her child's birthday cake was unknowingly dusting it with poison. By the 1920s, the green cakes vanished, replaced by pastel icings tinted with vegetable dyes. Yet the story lingers, a reminder that beauty has always come at a cost. In a world obsessed with presentation, people once risked their health for a color that caught the light just right. Picture it now, a tea table gleaming with porcelain, guests murmuring compliments, and that perfect green cake glowing softly under gaslight. Every bite a small gamble, every crumb a piece of history, sweet, striking, and unforgivably poisonous. 8. The Whiskey Snow Cream. Before electric freezers, ice cream wasn't made. It was gathered. On cold winter mornings in the late 1800s, families across rural America stepped outside with tin bowls and wooden spoons, scooping clean snow right from the yard. They mixed it with cream, sugar, and vanilla, stirring quickly before it melted. The result was snow cream, a simple, fleeting treat that tasted like winter itself. But when grown-ups wanted something stronger, they added a secret ingredient: whiskey. The tradition began on the frontier, where whiskey was both medicine and morale. In small cabins from Kentucky to Minnesota, families would doctor their snow cream with a shot of homemade corn liquor, turning it into what old recipes called whiskey snow cream. It was a dessert for adults, a warming sweetness that softened the bite of winter. Men joked it took the frost out of your bones, while women called it Sunday snow. In a time before pasteurization or regulation, no one worried about the source of the snow. Fresh drifts were seen as pure, even holy. Children collected it in buckets, and mothers strained it through cloth to remove twigs or soot from the chimney. When the cream met the whiskey, the mixture shimmered like liquid gold. Served in small glasses by the fire, it was a celebration of the season and of survival. But as cities grew and pollution followed, snow lost its innocence. By the early 1900s, scientists began warning that snow could carry soot, dust, and bacteria from the air. Health boards issued statements calling it unfit for human consumption. The rise of prohibition in 1920 finished what science had started. The combination of whiskey and snow, two symbols of old-fashioned joy, vanished from respectable kitchens overnight. Those who kept the tradition alive did so quietly. A handful of old farmers and mountain families continued making it well into the 1940s, passing the recipe down in whispers. One Kentucky diary entry from 1933 describes it plainly. The snow was clean and the whiskey warm. We felt young again. That's all it was meant to be, a moment of escape, a pause in the long, cold months. Today, when snow falls across the American heartland, most people stay indoors, watching from behind windows. Few remember that snow was once something you could taste. The whiskey snow cream has melted into memory. Too risky, too raw, too real for the world that came after. But if you listen closely on a quiet winter night, you can almost imagine it. The scrape of a tin spoon, the laughter around a fire, and the slow, smoky sweetness of snow kissed with whiskey. A taste both fleeting and forbidden. 9. The lead tin pudding molds. In the grand dining rooms of the 19th century, dessert was more than food. It was sculpture. Shimmering jellies, towering puddings, and molded creams arrived at the table like works of art, each one glistening in candlelight. Their secret wasn't just in the recipe, it was in the mold. Cast from tin, pewter, or lead, these ornate vessels shaped everything from plum puddings to blancmange. They were beautiful. They were toxic. For Victorian cooks, presentation was pride. Pudding molds came in elaborate designs: flowers, fruits, crowns, even miniature castles. Imported from England or Germany, they were considered heirlooms, often engraved with initials or family crests. Housewives displayed them proudly in kitchen cupboards, their dull gray surfaces hiding a quiet danger. Few realized that the metal itself, especially when made with lead solder, could leach into food, particularly the acidic or hot mixtures used for puddings. The result? Subtle, slow poisoning. Families suffered from stomach complaints, fatigue, and tremors, never connecting their elegant desserts to the symptoms. Some historians believe chronic lead exposure from cookware contributed to widespread illnesses throughout the 19th century, especially in wealthier homes where molded desserts were served often. Doctors of the time called it the cook's curse. Even as knowledge grew, the molds remained in use. They were too precious, too traditional to throw away. Recipes in Godey's Lady's Book and the Boston Cooking School Cookbook continued to feature instructions like pour into a well-tinned mold and set to chill, assuming the reader knew or ignored the risks. It wasn't until the 1920s, when aluminum and enamelware became popular, that lid tin molds finally disappeared from kitchens. But their legacy lingered. Collectors today prize those molds for their craftsmanship, unaware that they once turned family desserts into slow poison. Their delicate engravings tell a story of beauty and ignorance intertwined. There's something tragic about them, a reminder of how progress often hides peril. A Victorian hostess might have spent hours perfecting her pudding, proud of its gleam and symmetry, only to serve her guests a quiet dose of danger. The mold, not the recipe, became the real villain of the story. Today, the molds rest behind glass in antique shops, admired for their charm but stripped of their original purpose. To touch one is to touch history, cold, heavy, and lined with secrets. The desserts they shaped may be gone, but the lesson remains. Not every gleam is harmless, and not every tradition deserves revival. 10. The opium almond cake. In the drawing rooms of the mid-1800s, elegance was measured in restraint. Soft voices, lace gloves, and delicate slices of almond cake served on fine china. But behind the sweetness of some of those desserts lingered a darker indulgence. Known quietly among upper-class hostesses as opium almond cake, this genteel confection was laced with something far more intoxicating than sugar or spice. Whereas opium had long been a part of 19th century medicine. Apothecaries sold tinctures like laudanum freely, used to calm nerves, relieve pain, or simply steady the mood. For the fashionable elite, it was both a cure and a comfort. A few drops in tea or cordial were considered harmless, civilized even. It wasn't long before that same medicinal tincture found its way into desserts. Cooks discovered that opium's earthy bitterness paired beautifully with almond extract. A small amount added to sponge or pound cake created a mellow, dreamy warmth that made guests feel serene, talkative, and just a little detached from the world. It wasn't served at children's tables or country picnics. It was an adults-only luxury, passed quietly between ladies who couldn't sleep or felt unwell. At first, no one questioned it. The era's cookbook sometimes listed laudanum or tincture of opium alongside other household ingredients. Doctors prescribed it for hysteria, heartbreak, and sleeplessness. It was considered refined, not reckless. But behind closed doors, addiction grew in silence. Diaries from the time tell of women who could not function without their cordial. They weren't criminals, they were victims of custom. By the late 19th century, reformers began to notice. Newspapers exposed the opium habit spreading among respectable families, and by 1909, Congress passed the Opium Exclusion Act, cutting off legal imports. Overnight, the recipes vanished. Families tore pages from cookbooks or quietly edited out the tincture. The almond cake remained, but its signature calm, its dreamy hush, disappeared with the drug. What's left today is a ghost of a dessert. The almond flavor we know now, bright, pure, and innocent, once carried a whisper of oblivion. To taste it in its original form would be to step into a time when pain was private, beauty was measured in silence, and even a slice of cake could blur the edges of reality. Imagine a parlor after supper, the clink of forks, the soft laughter, the faint scent of almonds and opium in the air, guests reclining in velvet chairs, eyes half closed, the world slowing to a gentle drift. It was elegance laced with danger, a reminder that comfort in every age has its cost.